everybody, it's your favorite gentleman, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today you all are in for a treat. I have a dynamic guest here on the show that I'm so excited to bring to the Gentleman Style Podcast stage today. We're going to talk about a few things, several different things. We're going to cover a very broad brushstroke of different topics, starting with what is a gentleman? You guys won't want to miss 1 second of this powerhouse speaker. I'm so excited for him, and I can't wait to bring him to the stage. So stay with us, stay tuned, stay engaged. Here we go. Everybody, it's your favorite gentleman, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today I have coming to the stage Mr. Jeremy Sherman, PhD. This man is incredible. He has proposed that we need a Gent 4.0 approach. The first gentleman is what we are going to be talking about live here on the show. And we're going to dive in deep here and touch on those broad strokes of different topics. Mr. Sherman, has a vast array of knowledge. He's a social science writer, researcher with a master's in public policy and evolutionary eschatology, which simply means a focus on how different kinds of organisms make an interpretive effort. For the past 25 years, he has collaborated closely with Harvard, Berkeley neuroscientist and biological anthropologist Terence Deacon. Together, they study the emergence of nature of cells and effort, and how organisms struggling for existence emerge from chemistry. Mr. Sherman is here today on the Gentleman Style Podcast Show to show us, and teach us, and educate us. We are going to get learned today. So help me welcome this dynamic speaker. Help me welcome him to the stage, Mr. Jeremy Sherman. Welcome to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show, sir. How are you?
I am fabulous. I just came back from a dog walk with that guy Terence Deacon. We talk theory. He's got a dog. I don't have a dog. He's got a Bernese mountain dog. So we go out there and we walk and work out pieces of the theory while the dogs play. So it's been a good morning so far.
So yeah, the dog is educated now. So the dog has been brought up to speed, and that is unique. That is good. That is healthy.
Yeah.
Sir, your resume is extensive. I could read it all day long. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us here today on the show. And sir, I just wanted to ask you why you have an incredible mind. You could literally do anything you set your heart to and your mind to. What is the passion behind it? Is there a story as to why?
Oh yeah, no, sure. Of course there's a story. And it starts with actually roughly 40 years of high anxiety and neurosis, because I could do anything. So I ended up with this very weird life. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, a Jewish family, during a time when the Jews were doing really well. They still often are, but back then they were really doing well, and I ended up with an inheritance at age 16. And when you said you could do anything, yeah, that's a great freedom, and everybody rightly envies it, but it's also a little anxiety producing, because in my case, I felt really guilty about having an inheritance starting at age 16. I felt like I was obligated to do something useful in the world. In fact, I felt like I could never justify having inherited a lifetime's worth of income if I didn't end up doing something as important as Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, I know that's ridiculous, but that's where I was. I spent my first whole 20 years trying out various approaches to social activism. My father himself was an activist who was working with Jesse Jackson, Ralph Nader, Saul Alinsky, who started the school where Obama went to school. So even though he was a businessman, my father and grandfather had started Midas Mufflers. But he became an activist in his later years, and I got into that work. So at about age 20, I gave up my inheritance. I signed a vow of poverty and joined the world's largest hippie commune. And so anyway, that's the backstory. And then at about 35, 37 years old, I got really interested in evolutionary theory and then evolutionary psychology. So this is basically me thinking, yeah, there are all these ideas about how you should live, but if you really want a credible source, go to the science and try and figure out who we are. I mean, we're this mid-sized mammal that evolved and has language. And that's around the time that I met this guy, Terence Deacon. He was teaching at Harvard at the time and had just written this big book on the evolution of language and how it changes us, how we're not like other critters. And he had just turned his attention to an even bigger question. And I should say, when I first read this guy's book, I cried, not because it was moving, just because it was really hard. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist. I had a fair amount of education by this time. I had my master's in public policy, but he got on my PhD committee, and then we've been jamming ever since then. And it has expanded into a whole range of topics that I can summarize as cradle to grave. That is, from the origins of life, our cradle, to our current grave situation, including the economic, political, social situation. And I study the whole range across that stuff. And that ended up being just very fulfilling. I kind of got over the question of whether I was going to make a big difference. I just started taking careful notes, as careful as I can, on who we are and how we got here and where we might go from here. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. That's a nutshell of this nut.
That's a good nutshell. That's a good one. And we need that, right? And we need that in order to know where we're heading. We have to look in the rear. We have to take that hard look and say, hey, what have we done? Where have we come from? And how do we make sure, if we made a mistake, how do we make sure we do not repeat history? And in order for us to know, we need experts like you and Mr. Terence to look and tell us and say, hey man, we're about to repeat some things if we don't change the trajectory of certain things. This is the average lifespan of a human. And this is, for example, the biggest one, retirement. We can talk about retirement, that people are living longer. All right. And there's a science behind that as to why, people didn't live past a certain age to now today, where people are, and it changes so many different things. Living longer just in itself, and the who's and the how's and the why's, has a tremendous impact as to so many other things. It affects policy, it affects businesses, for example, insurance. If you live longer, now that changes my actuarial table, because now I have to project I need more money in order to pay out this death claim because people are living longer. That's just a broad stroke example, but we need you and experts like you to help us, because we don't know the science and we don't know the history.
Yeah, though I should be clear. I don't think it's possible to be an expert in the social sciences. So I work mostly in the social sciences, though I also have to work in the physics in order to explain the origins of life from chemistry, and I have to work in biology as well. But mostly I'm in the social sciences. I am a specialist. You can't be an expert in this stuff. It's too complicated. I often say psychology is not rocket science. It's way harder. It's way more complicated. There are way more variables going on. And here I'm quoting basically Newton, who says, look, I can track the movement of the stars, but I cannot track the madness of humans. We're too complicated. So I'm a specialist. I'm not an expert. I mean, it depends on how you define those things, but I mostly avoid that. I'm making the most careful guesses I can. But you can't actually work in science without the possibility that you will have spent your whole life barking up the wrong tree. That is built right into the assumptions of science. That is, we're a search party, which may mean that you go off searching for your whole life in science and end up not being the one who found it. And that's okay with us. We're fine with that. We live with that. That's fine.
That makes sense. So one of the things that you touch on, one of the things, you have many different articles. You're in Talk Psychology Today. Psychology Today hails you and your research and your discoveries as just profound and prolific. One of the things that you do, that you talk to, is the Gent 4.0 approach. Can you explain what that is and
Yeah, so
why
so
we
the
need it?
the concept of a gentleman has evolved culturally over the centuries. Um, Gentlemen were actually originally landed gentry. They owned land. How did they come by that land? Um, there are a lot of parallels between gangster politics and real politics. I'm not saying that with any kind of judgment about it. I'm just saying this seems to be a way that humans organize. So kings are kind of like mob bosses. In history, one of the things we talk about is the importance of the invention of the stirrup. Check this out. So the stirrup, you'd think that's not a big deal, just some place to put your foot. But the actual thing is that if you have stirrups, you can actually balance and wield heavy weapons, which makes it possible for you to be a gangster. Um, uh, so the Mongolian hordes, for example, they were like motorcycle gangs on horses. And one of the things they had going for them was stirrups. And then you got the protection racket, where a local leader can say, you have to pay taxes to me. And if you do, I will protect you against the potential invaders. But at the same time, as with the protection racket, if you don't pay your taxes to me, then I'm also on a horse with stirrups and weapons, and you have to watch out for me. So the first gentlemen were actually the equivalent of made men. These were knights or people who somehow were able to marshal local serfs and the like and bring them into battle in the service of a higher mob boss. And once they did that, they were granted land for all perpetuity. So these were the landed gentry. So all the nobility with all of those castles, all the Downton Abbey stuff, you say, how do these guys pay rent on places like that? Well, they have to pay for upkeep and all of that, but the land was granted to them. It was the bonus for helping out in some long forgotten battle. So that's Gentleman 1.0. It's basically the made men. Gentleman 2.0 is the generalization of that would have happened as, you could say, as in the Renaissance, you've got people who weren't landed gentry making it big. The Medici family, for example, in Italy. These are people who didn't have the land, and yet they could still behave kind of like the nobility, and you get this generalized notion of gentleman. And it comes with some implications that a gentleman is a decent person, a kind person, an honorable, respectful, civilized person, not someone boorish. And then from there, you get the kind of what we call bleaching of the concept. So bleaching means that it no longer necessarily means much of anything. So this, when we see the word gentleman on a bathroom door, or when they say ladies and gentlemen, you could say even this I'm talking about Gentleman 3.0, and I'm making this up based on, I'm not a student of this who's read deep histories of it. There are probably people who could correct me on aspects of this, but I'm just giving the general contours of how we ended up with Gentleman 3.0. The idea that a gentleman is someone who dresses a certain way, that is, they have a history, they have a look, they have a style. Gentlemen would also perhaps be associated with the kind of finer liquor ads. It's just kind of you could say it's kind of like being cool. And I'm suggesting that actually in our current era, we need a different definition. So Gentleman 4.0 for me is someone who has gotten very good at being honest and realistic, and in the most tactful ways they can be. So, for example, I have a rule with myself that there's nothing I can't say if I find the right way to say it. So I'm kind of obsessed with language. I'm very fussy about words and trying to figure out how to say things that are blunt and true, but to say them with the least likelihood of generating pushback or resistance to it. You could say it's a kind of diplomacy, because the diplomats have to be very honest. In a way, they have to be very assertive, but they also have to be very gentle in their assertiveness. So it's kind of a paradox to be gently assertive, to be smoothly aggressive, you could even say.
That's true. That's so true. Mr. Jeremy Sherman, y'all. We have a quick commercial break. You guys don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Stay with us. Stay engaged. We'll be right back. Good day, podcast listeners. This is your boy, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I wanted to let you guys know that we will be rolling out a new feature and adding a join sponsor button next to the subscriber button here at the bottom of your screen. Once you click the button, it will display 3 membership levels. Gentleman Gentry, which is our entry level, Duke Duchess, which is our season level, and the Emperor and Empress, which is our most sophisticated level, which you will receive unique perks and benefits at each differing level and gain access to our community tab. We will also be sharing polls, upcoming events, and interviews, as well as receive feedback from our sponsors directly. Your support helps me find new and exciting guests to bring to the stage live. Well, in order to get the higher end speakers, it requires, you guessed it, money. So thank you for tuning in to my channel. And if becoming a sponsor sounds good to you, then select the join button below and choose your desired sponsor level. Let's continue to grow and serve the future of generations of men and women to come. Love you guys. Bye. We are back. If you are just tuning into the Gentleman Style Podcast Show, I have the incredible, the amazing, super fragilistic, expialidocious Mr. Jeremy Sherman, PhD. And this man broke down what is a landed gentry and how they came into power through the appointment, through the stewardship and the leadership and dedication of the king, right, in the Renaissance era and the Knight era, right? And so how they became almost like modern day stewards and bounty hunters and police officers, policing the community and regulating community, and you can trace it all the way back in our history. And so he broke that down. If you missed that, go back, scroll back, and tune back in to how that came to be and what Mr. Sherman broke down for us. Sir, you have a book. You speak into this. This is the opposite of a gentleman. And you wrote the book. It's called What's Up with A-Holes? So that an A-hole is the complete opposite of a gentleman. Please tell us, what can people expect in this book and what inspired this writing?
Okay. So first of all, the book's already available. I just read the whole thing aloud and carefully and well edited. It's already available as a podcast or podclass. It's just like 14 half-hour sessions. It's what I call psychoproctology, trying to understand basically trying to figure out who is being an a-hole, or I'll just call them buttheads for now. What is a butthead? Since it can't just be whoever we happen to butt heads with, which is kind of the current definition. That is, if I keep on finding someone stubborn, I might call them a butthead. But buttheads are a real problem in society, and there's also a way in which buttheads are like the original version of landed gentry. That is, the landed gentry were the guys who were the made men. That is, they were really thugs. They came across as dignified because they were in the elite. But no, I'm now saying that style, that being a butthead, being someone who simply bosses people around, is really dangerous for society. That is someone who pretends that they're a wall and you can't get past them. There's no give and take with these folks. So anyway, how did I get into this? I think I kind of got into it through politics. I realized that we were not going to survive as a nation as long as we continued to have the mafia boss approach to politics driving things. We actually need more give and take. And why? Because life is more crowded these days. Like you say, we live longer, but also we live closer to each other. We're up in each other's faces more. It's almost like the other day I came up with this version of it, which is the history of civilization. Yeah, I used to live alone. I had a lot of space. Because there was a lot of space, it started to get invaded by all sorts of people. Now I got millions of roommates, and I can hardly hear myself think because they're all talking loud. And who's talking loudest is the one who prevails in the conversation. It's almost like if you go to a club and it's so noisy, everybody starts trying to out-talk each other. And who's going to out-talk the most? Well, it's going to be the buttheads who just say whatever captures attention. So what I'm describing here is the way. So that's kind of a metaphor, or a metaphor for what it's like now to live among each other, all crowded, very noisy. You could say through the internet and all sorts of social media and all of that. And who gets the most attention in that din? It's the buttheads. So I'm very concerned about that and what it will do to our future. I happen to be writing this whole thing under while in COVID. And from my perspective, and this is not a political position, I would argue, from my perspective, we were dealing with a real butthead epidemic, mostly on the right these days. That is, Donald Trump is, from my perspective, the ideal, perfect, pristine, crystalline butthead. That is, from my perspective, he'd be hard to mistake for anything but one. That is, you could mistake Hitler for a nationalist, or you could mistake Stalin for a communist. I don't think they really were. I just think that they were extreme buttheads. I think it's harder to mistake Trump for anything but buttheadedness because he clearly doesn't stand for anything. And I would say the same if he pandered to my crew, to the people who believed in my stuff. That is, if I had someone who was pandering the way he does to right-wing sentiments, but he was pandering to me, I tend to be more liberal at the liberal end of things. I'd still think he was a butthead. I mean, it's not got nothing to do with what you claim to believe. It's all in how you strut it. And so it was really great fun to be able to work on this book throughout COVID while watching this perfect example.
You got
and his crew and all his made men.
Yeah, his source material, his bullies. So is a butthead born? Are we just born into buttheadism, or are we made, or are we taught? What is the cradle to the grave behind that?
Yeah, so here's my sense of it. It's the obvious option for humans if they can get away with it. So the whole latter part of the book is how to be a gentleman, how to keep them from getting away from it. But let me explain why. So remember, one of the risks in writing a book about buttheads is that I could just pull out my butt, whatever idea I have about who's a butthead, and then make a strong case why they're the buttheads. And that would be my book. And actually there are various books like that about, so I'm saying, no, that won't work. I don't want to do that. I want to actually figure out what a butthead is from their origins. And since I'm an origins of life researcher and someone who's also paying a whole lot of attention to how this mid-sized mammal, the primates we are, ended up with language and how that radically changes us. So let me just take this one little piece from the origins of life, which is that organisms, everything falls apart. That's what they call the second law of thermodynamics. Everything's degenerating. If you leave out something fragile, it's going to fall apart in a while. So the main things that organisms have to do is they have to protect against degeneration, and they have to repair what degenerates. That's what we all do. That's what all organisms do, even trees. And for repair, to do repair work, you have to take in resources and energy. So I have to take in resources and energy in order to regenerate myself, but I also have to protect against energy, because energy is actually what degenerates us. If you were in the wind all the time, you'd get worn out. That's an example of what energy actually does. So I have to take in the right energy and protect against the wrong energy. I have to take in food. I can't eat poison, that kind of thing. That's true of all organisms. Now, take that into the realm of humans, and what do you get? You get what's called confirmation bias, which is I want to take in the ideas that regenerate my mojo, that keep me motivated. And I want to keep out the ideas that degenerate my mojo. I don't want to hear disappointing things. I want to hear affirming things. That's what is going on for all of us. That is, like, some ideas feel like poison to our system, and some ideas feel like food, really nutritional. If someone flatters you, it can feel like, wow, yeah, that's what I want. I want more of that, and they must be right, and anybody who challenges me must be wrong. Now, normal, decent, gentle people recognize that confirmation bias is a problem, that sometimes you have to take in harsh criticism. And I want to say that buttheads treat confirmation bias as the solution to all their problems. It's how they can feel perfectly safe and perfectly free. They can do whatever they want, and whatever they do is the best. And how do they do this? By figuring out ways to disengage with anything discouraging. And it can be they write you off, they ignore you, they fight you, anybody who challenges you. So that's kind of an origins of life explanation for what's going on with butthead. And it's a product of language. There are all sorts of predators in the biological world. There's all sorts of parasites. But being a butthead is a human thing. And it's because you've got language. So language makes us a really unusual creature, both more visionary and more delusional than any other creature. Because we live kind of in two worlds. We live in the real world where all organisms live, but we also can close our eyes and live in the world of our imaginations and become legends in our own mind. So that's a kind of a shorthand about what I think is going on with them. I think that it's very easy. You could say it's easier to play God than be human. It's more fun too. And if you get away with it, it's really powerful. That is, we do see buttheads climb to positions of great power, in part because people back off. If someone comes at you all aggressive, like they are a know-it-all, like they know everything that matters, we tend to humor them. And that's one of the reasons why I think we got to get past Gentleman 2.0 and Gentleman 3.0. I think you got to give these people a hard time. So the whole second part of my approach of my book is about how to give them a hard time, how to make it cost to be a butthead. Because if we don't make it costly, there's no reason they'd ever stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. It's Jeremy Sherman. I want to backtrack a little bit. How did landed gentries become appointed by the king? Did they have to do something? Right? It's the same. It's the same concept of us, right? So to be a butthead, you had to do something to be appointed a position of power. Someone has to believe in you, or is that true?
Well, okay. So first of all, yes, you were appointed like made men. It's very much like the gangster thing, which is you have to do a significant number of favors, and then you become noble. Back in the day, which means that you are granted land, and you're granted serfs too. The serfs were basically the same as slaves. That is, you were trapped on your land. You had if you were poor, you were trapped on your land. You had no mobility. It's almost in the way like sharecropping. And actually, it was a pandemic that changed things first, which was that the pandemic killed a whole lot of workers, which meant that after the pandemic was over, we're talking about the Black Plague here. After the plague, the bubonic plague, there were fewer workers. So it's actually, we're seeing a parallel that right now. We're seeing that workers are actually in a position of a little bit more power now because there are fewer of them than there were before. That was a real big deal in Europe during the bubonic plague because 1/3 of Europe died. I mean, 1/3 of the whole population. So that's a whole lot. And this is before machines. So everything had to be done by hand. And if you got a bunch of people who are doing it by hand, and they're the serfs, and they have no power, and then suddenly 1/3 of them dies, and the farmers the landed gentry still need stuff done. So they're going to have to come up with a bit more resources to pay basically their slaves in a serf society. So that's one of the So that's one of the things. But you had a second point there, which was about whether they have to be. Here's the thing. I don't think you need to be officially recognized in order to be a butthead. So there are buttheads who are political high power buttheads. And then there are, and some of them, so those will have official positions. But check this out. There are also buttheads in the home. That is, you can have someone who doesn't have an ideology. They don't, it's not that they have an ideology. It's just that there's no talking to them about anything. There's no give and take with these people. It's their way or the highway, and you can't get on the highway. They know you've got you trapped. They know you've got you trapped. They know they have you trapped. So there are lots of ways to become like this. I think of it as there are lots of detours to aholia. No matter what path you're on, you can just figure out a way to pretend you're still on that path when actually all you've done is you've gone to this place where you feel perfectly safe and perfectly free, what I call the wild card, trump card formula. The wild card is I can do anything. Trump card is whatever I do, it's the best. So back off. And you don't, so, anybody can do this if they can get away with it. That's the point.
Right. And so thank you for breaking that down. That's what we needed to hear. That's what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
As far as where we come from and like you said, the bubonic plague, we're reliving it, right? COVID showed us we're almost going through it again. And we're gonna go to a quick commercial break. But I want to take us into that next level of talking about COVID and repeating some of history and how do we get through it. Don't go anywhere, you guys. Stay tuned. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Message from our show sponsors.
If you're looking for a reliable, professional trucking and logistics service, you've come to the right place. Musa Trucking is a veteran-owned and operated premier transportation provider that can help with all of your trucking and logistics needs. Musa is revolutionizing the trucking industry through strategic partnerships, the development of core personnel, and the use of cutting-edge technology. Our inventory system ensures that cargo ends up divided into the right trucks and reaching the correct destination. Our drivers are dedicated to transporting goods efficiently and safely. Contact us today to get started by visiting the website on the screen or by calling 757-756-5246.
We are back to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. Welcome back. If you're tuning in, we are discussing the history of gentlemen and landed gentry and how they were appointed by the king. And even today, we are still going through this, even in history. History shows that we are repeating ourselves and reliving ourselves. And Mr. Jeremy Sherman is taking us through, walking us through this like a doctor, like a surgeon, like with his scalpel and his knives, and he's just dissecting it all for us. And we were, before we went on a commercial break, we were transitioning to COVID-19. 2020 was a tumultuous year. It was a terrible year. Many people died. Many families lost loved ones and friends and family members. But we've been here before. We've been through this. History shows that we've been through this before and we survived it. What is it that you see, or what is the way ahead? How can we do better coming out of this? Because I don't feel, and there are schools of thought that feels we're not through this yet. Even though Congress and certain political parties would like us to believe we are, that the worst is over. But I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or I'm way off, but I think, the worst is yet to come.
Well, actually, there's a piece of history that connects up to gentlemen again around this. Yet another piece of it. It's from the Renaissance. So in the Renaissance, you didn't have big nation states back then. You had city states. So Florence was its own country, and Milan was its own country. little things. And what are these things? These are basically gang-run cities. So you had a prince who was in charge, and then you had a bunch of nobles under the prince, and then you had all the serfs who were working for these guys and paying taxes and stuff like that. And then you had warring between the different cities, which is a lot like gangland stuff. So, you have the mob in Chicago and the mob in St. Louis, and occasionally they get in fights and all this. Okay, so we're back in the Renaissance. Milan is attacking Florence, and Florence is on a run. I mean, that is, they are not doing so well. And then the prince in Milan dies of the plague. And Florence sighs a sigh of relief and says, we were not well prepared for that war. What can we do? And this is the birth of the liberal arts education. So what is a liberal arts? Liberal originally meant the free people, not the slaves. This is not the education for the slaves. This is a slave for the free people in the time. And they landed on a concept that I like a lot. They called it we call it civic humanism, but it was based on something they picked up from even way earlier Greek times, what they called the trivium. The trivium was the original education of the liberal arts education, and it was designed to make a citizenry who were going to be a better defense of the city-state. What was the education? It was 3 subjects. It was rhetoric, logic, and grammar. Now, I'm going to set aside grammar for a minute and just talk about those first 2. You would think maybe, well, all you need to do is just straighten everybody up about logic. Once they get their logic down, everybody will be reasonable. No, they didn't think that. They thought, no, you actually need to train people in how to cut in conversation, how to be assertive, how to spin stuff. You could say that rhetoric and logic are 2 opposite sides of the same coin. Rhetoric is how to spin stuff, and logic is how to unspin it, how to look at it neutrally. I now write a lot about the novum trivium, which would be the new trivium, and it would basically be how to spin, how to unspin, and how to do both even-handedly. How to unspin your own arguments and how to spin up your opponent's arguments. Now, I don't think I made this connection before this conversation, but I think that's what I'm talking about with Gentleman 4.0. Gent 4.0, it's gender neutral. But this is someone who knows how to cut in conversation. That is, they're not just defenselessly embracing logic. They know how to spin stuff, how to make rhetorical arguments. And they know how to keep from being persuaded by other people's spin. And then for me, the big piece, and this is actually based on something that was a big deal to Socrates of all people. He said, the problem with teaching people logic is they're going to use logic just to spin whatever BS they want to spin. That's not, the first use of logic. I get to see this because I deal with a lot of Trump trolls, and the first thing they tell me is that they're critical thinkers, which is just a joke. They have no idea what critical thinking is. But that's not. But their minister or their political leaders they told them that they were all critical thinkers, so now they're going to do that like sheep. They're going to go along with it. But anyway,
and bleaching your skin.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think when they say that they're critical thinkers, I think they're just trying to wear what the cool kids are wearing. It's a kind of bling. So sure, I'll claim I have it, just like they'll claim that they're patriots or whatever, that they're Christian, whatever. It sounds good. They don't have to think about what it means. It's just ornamentation for them because once again, they want to feel safe and free, and they can get some status from it. So anyway, this business, what I'm saying, a Gent 4.0 is someone who's really good at spin and really good at unspin and can unspin their own arguments and spin up another person's arguments. So for me as a gent, the kind of gent I want to be able to make anybody's case persuasively for them, even if I think they are villains. I want to be able to make their case so that they'd say, damn, you really understand me. And then I want to be able to cut them. I mean, if the illustration I use is I'd want to be able to sit down with Hitler and say, make his case so he says, damn, you really understand me, and then slit his throat. I think it's important to be able to make someone else's case. And the same for my own stuff. That is, I put out a whole lot of articles. I can always make a counter argument to any argument I make. That is, I could make a very persuasive case why I'm wrong. This is independent of whether I believe that case. I want to be able to make a credible case, even though I don't find it credible. That is, I still believe what I wrote in my article, but I also want to be able to make the counter argument to it. That I think is tied into this thing of being a gentleman, Gent 4.0.
Absolutely. Mr. Sherman, sir, how can we connect with you? How can we learn more? How can we subscribe to the train you're on? The train has left the station. You are hard charging forward, but how can we learn more from you?
Well, if you just look up, if you just Google Jeremy Sherman, you'll find way too much of me in all sorts of forms. I'll give you an example. I have a podcast I called Negotiate with Yourself and Win, in which I am debating myself. So it's Jeremy Sherman PhD and Jeremy Sherman GED, and we work stuff out. We're trying to work out all sorts of ideas, and it's just a debate back and forth. So I have 3 podcasts, but basically, if you Google my name, there's way too much. I've written 1,000 articles for Psychology Today, and they're all trying to be totally accessible, totally real world. It's about practical stuff. I do some academic writing, but mostly I'm interested in applying this stuff in everyday life. But I also have a website, thanks for putting it up there, which has got basically a consolidation of all my stuff, my podcasts, my videos, my articles, my books. I tend to put my books out for free. I don't actually need the money for them, but I do want to give them what legs I can. So that's where you can find me. Just look me up at jeremysherman.com. And also, I'm on Facebook, very active. That is, I'm producing maybe 10 or 15 memes a day. I write a lot in bumper sticker form. So anybody who wants to friend me on there, you'll find me there. Or Instagram and all that.
Love it, love it, love it. This has been powerful. Sir, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for educating me and my audience, and taking our mindset around the concept of a Gent 4.0 to the next level, so we can evolve and we can grow together and be better and be able to cut and to converse and to be logical thinkers as we move into the new millennium. I thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I want to say thank you, my audience, for tuning in to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I hope this message has served you, and I hope this was helpful and helped open your mind and expand your thinking into where we came from, how we evolved as a society, as a culture, as a people, and how we are going to make it into the next decade. Like I end every show, take care of your friends, take care of your family, and always, always take care of business. This is Marcus Norman, your favorite gentleman, and Mr. Jeremy Sherman, PhD. Google him. He's Googleable all over. Check him out. Love you guys. Take care. Bye.